What if you woke up one morning only to find yourself transformed into a giant monstrous insect? Your body, your life, everything you once knew is suddenly gone. Would you panic, desperate to escape this nightmare? Or would you surrender to your new reality? This is the exact situation Gregor Samsa finds himself in. The Metamorphosis, one of the best known works in the world of fiction, was published in 1915 by Franz Kafka. Now, on to Gregor's reaction. You'd think that randomly waking up as a bug would cause you to freak out and just think, what is gonna happen to me now? I mean, not only do you physically resemble a bug, but what does that mean for the life, the ambition, everything you have lived up until this very point? Does it just cease to exist? Now that you no longer resemble your older self, your human self, what proof is there other than your consciousness that you are that very same person? What is the string that connects this, your past self, your human self, to your current self, the bug version? However, what's peculiar is that Gregor doesn't even freak out about any of these things. Quote, "What in the world has happened to me?" he thought. It was no dream. His room, a proper human room, if admittedly rather too small, lay peacefully between those four familiar walls. In this passage, he acknowledges that his room is still a human room. He's still surrounded by those four familiar walls. He can still observe and formulate thoughts, yet his transformation is the only thing out of place. He decides to go back to sleep, to quote, "forget all this foolishness," as if it was a dream. But he finds it impossible to do so. He tosses and he turns and he ends up complaining about how his life turns out. He's stuck in a job he hates. He has no time to build relationships or even friendships. And he just dreads his coworkers, his bosses. He just hates his life. Until he suddenly looks at the clock and realizes he's late for work. It is only then that we start to see him actually freak out. From the reader perspective, from our perspective, this entire situation is absurd. How would you worry about getting to work when you cannot even get out of bed? When you cannot even get out of your house? How would people even react to your transformation? Are you sure they'd even let you out in the streets without everyone running and screaming? But from Gregor's perspective, because he doesn't seriously acknowledge his physical transformation, he also fails to comprehend the physical limitations it would impose on him. He can't act like a human can. He can walk, he can stand up like a human because he's in the body of a bug. And as he tosses and turns because he's trying to get out of bed, but because once again he does not have the limbs a human does, he's a bug, he can easily get out of bed. And in that very moment, he actually compares this inability to get out of bed as mild aches that he had before that were, quote, proven to be a figment of his imagination, proving to us, the readers, that he believes his pain is only ever just a figment of his imagination, and his inability to get out of bed is just proof of his laziness. Instead of the fact that he's a bug, when he finally manages to get to the door to open it because everyone outside, his entire family, has gotten outside to ask him why is he not at work yet, he's standing up as a human. He's opening the door with his little limbs because he's still acting like his past self despite the fact that his current version has been physically altered. Then when he finally opens the door, that's when we finally see a normal reaction. His manager runs away in horror. His mother starts weeping and starts praying for a god. And his dad just stares at him with his fists clenched. Although Gregor Samsa is the main character, the Metamorphosis, as the title of the book, can actually be referring to not just Gregor, but his family, because they actually also undergo a giant change throughout the story. His father goes from a retired old man whom can only barely lift his hand when Gregor gets home to A violent, angry man who will do absolutely anything to protect his family from this giant bug. Even Gregor himself is astonished at how much his father changes from the beginning to the end of the story. There's a point where Gregor, because his family does not let him go out of his room, he finally gets out and he sees his father for the first time. And his father, he's dressed up in this nice uniform and he looks just put together. His hair is slicked back, and he has like these badges on his uniform. Gregor looks at him and thinks, "Is this man still my father?" And at this point of the book, Gregor has suffered multiple injuries because of his father. And you could be thinking, Gregor's asking this because of the way his father treats him. Does his father still see him as a son? Is this still my father? But no, Gregor is asking this because his dad is wearing a uniform and he looks capable. He looks like he's able to hold a job compared to how he was when Gregor was taking care of the family. His sister transforms from a girl whose only worries are to dress nicely, help around the house, and play violin, to a woman that her parents deem ready for marriage. And lastly, his mother. Now, his mother has a more subtle change throughout the story. The way she treats Gregor is just more passively, and at one point of the book, she actually pleads to spare him. She actually pleads to keep him alive. And this is more so because she believes that human Gregor will actually return one day if they just put up with Bug Gregor. But the one thing that stays the same from the start towards the ending is their perspective of this new Gregor. The way they treat him does vary, but their perspective is pretty obvious that they do not even accept Bug Gregor as Gregor. In their eyes, this is just a bug. They refuse to acknowledge Bug Gregor as their own son or even as a mental being. This ultimately begs the question, is Gregor, specifically Bug Gregor, still Gregor? Is he still Gregor despite having no physical resemblance to his older self? Can one even acknowledge him as Gregor? To be able to answer this question, I actually went towards philosophy, which actually created more questions. But these questions are more broad, and I will tackle each of them in one specific chapter. If a person has the same consciousness yet is in a completely different physical state, are they still the very same person? Do they still have the same personal identity? If others refuse to acknowledge their new identity, what does this mean for their personal identity? In the case of Gregor, not only does his family refuse to acknowledge this new version of him as their own son, they outright reject his humanity. What does this mean for him? Finally, the big question. To what extent can the external material world, for example, physical appearance, societal roles, and relationships with others, affect the internal one? Perspective, self-concept, identity, and emotions. What is the relationship between these two? These are the questions that we're gonna unpack throughout the video. So make sure to get a little cup of water, get a little duck as well. Get comfortable in your bed and hope that you never wake up as a bug. What makes a person in time 1 the same person in time 2? What is the evidence that these two beings are one and not two separate beings? What makes Gregor before his metamorphosis to Gregor after his metamorphosis the same person? What makes you the same person as you were 5 years ago? In order to understand the personal identity of a person, we first have to understand what is a person. And I'm sure you think that this is an obvious answer, but this is actually an extensive study in philosophy. Over decades, great thinkers both from modern times and older times have debated over what consists of a person and what makes the same person from different time to the same one in another time. Important distinction is that when referring to someone as a person, at least in philosophy, it is completely different from referring to them as a human. Person is a mental being, meaning they possess a mind. The mind does not always have to be conscious. After all, a sleeping person or someone in a coma is still a person, but there must always be the capacity for mentality. However, not just any mental being is a person. My cat is a mental being. He can feel pain or hunger, for example, yet he is not a person. So a person is at least a being that possesses a particular sort of mind. A person does not just have sensations of pain and pleasure, but also world-directed mental states, like the belief that it will rain tomorrow, or the desire that a certain political party will get elected. This is probably the answer that came to your head when I asked you, what is a person? It is known as the psychological theory, or the common sense answer, because it's the most popular one and the one that most people know. This theory was also expanded by Locke in the 17th century. He wrote, "A person is a thinking, intelligent being that has reason and reflection, and can consider itself as itself, the same thinking thing, in different times and places." Basically, person in time A and person in time B are the same person only if there is psychological continuity between the two. You would think that because this is a common sense theory, everyone would agree. But there are a few other theories. Physical approach, as the name states, is the claim that our identity over time depends on the physical state. One version of the physical approach is the bodily theory, which states that person in time A is the same person as time B if they have the same body. There is also the animalism theory, which states that they are the same person if they have the same biological organism. And there is also the brain theory, which says that they are the same person if they have the same brain. However, these ones have more flaw to them compared to one that I mentioned earlier of the psychological theory. Yet they are still very much worth mentioning. Now, what about Gregor's case? According to the psychological theory, Gregor is still Gregor because there is psychological continuity between his both versions. We get access to his consciousness as the readers, and we are aware that he is a bug and he's a human in the body of a bug. Actually, I say that he's a bug for the sake of simplicity because Frank Kafka never wanted people to actually draw Gregor as a bug. He just wanted the readers to read the book and feel the emotions of Gregor as a bug, but he never confirmed if he actually transformed into a bug, right? If you read the book, you can notice that it could actually just be a synonym or a different way to say that he feels disgusting, he feels worthless as a bug. So if you do read the book, please do not think that Gregor literally transformed into a bug. He is just trying to use that as a metaphor. Gregor is still Gregor because he still loves his family. He still thinks of himself as Gregor. He still has the same worries as human Gregor did. And we are aware of this because he narrates the book. And we know he narrates the book because at the end of the story, when he dies, the book suddenly transforms to calling his mom as her actual name and his father as his actual name. However, because Gregor has psychological continuity but no physical continuity, meaning that his current self does not resemble his older self because he's a bug, and his older self was a human, that means there's no continuity there, which means that his parents do not have proof that this is Gregor. We do because we have access to his consciousness as the readers, but his parents do not. Us, we do not see him as a bug. We see him as Gregor who woke up one day in a bug. The same cannot be said for his family. They do not see him as bug Gregor. They see him as a bug, which is why if you read the book, you can get quite emotional and quite upset at the way his family is treating him because you are aware that this is a human in the body of a bug. That's how you can feel sad or anger for the way his family is treating him. But what does this mean then for Gregor? When I say Gregor loves his family, it'd be a heavy understatement. A better way to say it is that he sacrifices himself for his family, is willing to endure 5 years in a job he hates, that takes a toll on him mentally and physically just to pay off his father's debt. When he transforms into a bug, he would constantly hide himself under the bed and in a blanket, despite it being heavily uncomfortable, because he knew that his sight repulsed others. For Gregor, his family was everything, his world, his joy, and the ones that matter most when deciding his sense of self. Before his transformation, his sense of self, his self worth, was tied to the fact that he was able to provide and be of use to his family. It was linked to this idea of being this hardworking, dutiful, and dependable son. Quote, Gregor felt great pride at being able to give his family and sister a life like this in such a beautiful apartment. But what if all this tranquility, all this prosperity and contentment were now coming to a horrific end? So as to not get lost in such contemplations, Gregor set himself in motion, crawling back and forth across the room. When he says tranquility, prosperity, and contentment, he is not referring to himself. We are well aware that he was miserable at his job. He is referring to his family. When he overhears his family talking about getting a job now that he can no longer pay the bills, his first reaction is to burn in shame and sorrow. This can actually all explain what happened at the start of the book. Why Gregor never freaked out when he saw that he turned into a bug. Why he believed he could get out of bed, get on a train, and go to his work. Why he believed he could still live his normal life. As Ashley Simons phrases it in her own literary analysis of this book, Gregor reacts this way because he has a misplaced view of his identity, believing that it is based upon the physical action he completes rather than the activity of his mind. He refuses to even acknowledge this inability because to do so would be to deny his individuality and thus would invalidate his own existence. The removal of his human form and all subsequent human actions, such as working a job, would mean the removal of his identity. To stretch this a bit further, it was not simply the inability to work that terrified him so much, but the fact that he felt like he was only someone or worth something when he was able to provide for his family. Because what is he, if not the son of Herr Samsa and Frau Samsa? What is he if not the brother of Gretz? What is he if he is not a hardworking, dependable, and dutiful member of the family? When his sister and mother were moving out the furniture of his room so he'd have more space to crawl, his mother actually opposes to the idea. The second Gregor hears that his mother opposes to him, his instant desire to have his room furniture taken out switches. Did he really want to have this warm room, comfortably furnished with family heirlooms, transformed into a cave or den in which, to be sure, he would be able to crawl in every direction, but at the price of swiftly and completely forgetting his human past? In this scene, we can see how his bug instincts and his human emotions clash. His bug instincts tell him to take everything out so he'd be able to crawl comfortably. His human instincts tell him that he needs to keep his family heirlooms. After all, it is one of the only things that is linking him to his human past. His human emotions eventually win over. As his mother and sister are taking the things out from his room, he freaks out. He gets out of his blanket. Yes, he was in a blanket this entire time. And he starts trying to find something to latch on. His mother faints when she sees him, and his sister is angry at him. She's angry, why would you get out of your blanket? She doesn't have enough time to get angry at him because her mother just fainted. So she goes to the medicine room, and Gregor actually tries to follow her there because she wants to help her, as quotes, in the good old days. The problem is that he's a bug. So the second his sister turns around, she freaks out and thinks he's trying to attack her. Throughout the entire story, Gregor Samsa thinks of himself as still a human being. When he opens the door, he's standing up. When he goes helps his sister, he still thinks that his sister sees him as a brother. The only moment he ever comes near to even accepting this as his new reality or even accepting that he's a bug is when he's listening to his sister playing the violin for some visitors. He's actually listening while he's hiding in a very little corner so nobody can see him. Quote, was he a beast? The music so moved him. He felt as if he were being shown the way to that unknown nourishment he craved. He was determined to creep all the way up to his sister, to pluck at her skirts, and in this way indicate to her that she should come to his room with her violin, for no one was rewarding her playing as he meant to reward her. He would not allow her to leave his room ever again. His horrific figure would, for the first time ever, be useful to him. He would be at all the doors of his room at once, growling at his attackers. But his sister should remain with him, not by force, but of her own free will. He is aware that others find him repulsive. That's why he can use the way he looks as a way to protect his sister. Although it is curious why he doesn't question whether or not his sister would not be repulsed by the way he looks as well. Even his appreciation of his sister's music is beast-like. Instead of just enjoying the music, his way of showing appreciation for her is to just growl at her attackers and to take care of her. With his plan in mind, he slowly advances toward his sister to finally manifest it into reality. That is, until one of the lodgers scream and point at him, causing the violin to fall silent. The situation immediately changes. His father grows worried and immediately tries to distract the lodgers by using his body to hide them from the sight of his own son. The lodgers are not even repulsed, they're just confused and curious. And that is until they realize that they had been living with this bug, this thing, for God knows how long. And that's when they declare their notice. This is the final straw of the family, and it is symbolized by the violin falling off his mother's lap, giving a note that echoed in the air. The sister, the one that he was just thinking of taking care of and making sure nobody hurt her, his sister is the first one to break the silence by asking for his death. Quote, I am unwilling to utter my brother's name before this creature, and therefore will say only, we have to try to get rid of it. We have done everything humanly possible to care for it and show it tolerance. In this passage, not only is she taking away Gregor from his role as a brother, as she says, there's no way this is my brother, but by using it to refer to him, she's taking away his humanity. His lack of appetite from suffering neglect, his father's violent acts that were lodged into his flesh, and the death sentence wished upon him by the very people he devoted his life for, all of this ultimately led to his demise. If you woke up one day and entered the room of a loved ones and they were gone, you would most likely wonder, where have they disappeared off to? Maybe you contact them. If you saw a random tiny bug on their bed, you would not think anything. Maybe shoo it away, maybe kill it. Assuming you have not read the Metamorphosis, or you have not watched this video, you would not link anything to this random little bug on their bed with your loved one. In case there is a giant-sized bug, human-sized bug instead of a tiny one, you'd most likely call the cops and immediately evacuate the house, because if there's a larger threat inhabiting your shelter, you'd most likely just go away. Now, I do not think Gregor Samsa wrote the book to make us feel guilty for killing a few bugs in our lifetime. I don't think so. However, I do think this book is a great opportunity to reflect on what we would do if we were in a similar situation. After all, keep in mind, the bug is just a metaphor for something else. It could mean somebody who's not able to work because of their physical situation. It could mean somebody who feels worthless and disgusting and feels like they're a bug. As I said earlier, because we are the readers, we get access to Gregor's consciousness, but his family does not and cannot. They merely perceive him to be a bug because that's all their eyes can perceive. From their perspective, this is not a question of, is it bug Gregor or human Gregor? Rather, it's their own son, Gregor, versus this random bug. Just because his family perceives him that way doesn't mean that we have to as well. Both things can be true at the same time. For his family, he's just a bug. But for us, we know that is Gregor stuck in a bug's body. But the thing is, for Gregor, it didn't really matter whether he was a bug, a beetle, an insect, whatever. What mattered for him was his family. He struggles to let go of his past not because he was a human, but because he felt like he was worth something when he was able to provide for his family. This tale of Gregor Samsa not only shows us our inability to sometimes see things beyond the physical surface, but also what happens if our sense of self is deeply intertwined with something outside of us, something external of us. It raises questions of the nature of identity. How much are we letting external factors such as our social roles, our relationships, social validation affect our sense of self? Ultimately, I believe one of Kafka's reasonings for writing this book is to make us question how much of our internal world, such as our personal identity, self conception, and sense of self, are we letting be shaped by the internal world, such as our career, material stuff, social relationships, etc.? It is indeed a well known fact that the environment around us does shape us. We all have something that we feel best defines us. What are you when you're stripped away from that very thing? And if it were to happen, would you accept it? Or just like Gregor, would it ultimately lead to your death?